Like many of its citizens, City of San Diego facing tough budget choices as it copes with the impacts of the pandemic. City facing a projected $124.1 million deficit for the fiscal year 2022. And it's reaching out to residents about what to cut or not to cut. We are joined by District 6 Councilman Chris Cate, chair of the city's Budget and Government Efficiency Committee. Councilman Cate, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I understand that you basically made up a survey for the people that are in your district, District 6.
We did, and it's part of our effort to do our outreach to our residents, especially during the first part of the calendar year in preparation for each budget year. But as you mentioned in your opening, this year is going to be a little bit tougher for the city and for residents potentially because of the huge expected deficit that we're projected to have beginning July 1. And so we wanted to reach out to our residents and understand what their priorities are as residents of District 6. That way we can be better advocates when the budget deliberations begin in the April timeframe when the mayor releases his budget for the upcoming year.
So what are we looking at? Because right now we're okay. As you said, we're looking ahead toward the fiscal year 2022. What's the situation that we're potentially getting into?
Well, right now it's difficult to project. We have some initial projections for our current year that we're in, and we're already projecting $10 million less in revenue. And that comes to things like our tourist tax, where we're not expecting the amount of conventions that we were originally anticipating. We've seen a cut in leisure travel as well, too, and that has an impact on the amount of tax revenue we generate as a city from tourists visiting San Diego. And that falls in line with some other things that we're not going to have next year when it comes to the CARES Act funding we received earlier this calendar year. Right now, we're not expecting any new additional money to come in. And those funds, those millions of dollars were used to shore up our current year budget situation. So we're at a time where we're going to have to prioritize. And part of the survey is to understand what's going to be those priorities for each of the council members, including myself, that we can advocate for on behalf of our residents.
Well, in terms of that survey, then what do you tell people is on the menu here? Because there are certain things that you possibly can't cut, and that limits your choices. So what are we looking at in terms of cuts?
That's a great question. And that's where we're trying to figure out, do we prioritize infrastructure over things like tree trimming or weed abatement? Where does arts and culture fit into the equation? How do we feel about public safety, whether it's our police officers, our firefighters, our lifeguards? These are all things that we're going to have to prioritize and determine what's going to be in the best interest of fulfilling the priorities we need to deliver services as a city. And we're going to probably have some very difficult discussions. The one thing that we're also trying to impress upon my new colleagues and our residents, from my perspective, is that now is not the time to going back to residents asking for more taxes and fees as well, too, because we're all struggling with this pandemic financially. I think we need to do a better job as a city to prioritize those services that we deem to be essential and necessary for our residents.
It's been talked about many times before about whether or not residents should directly pay for their trash pickup. Are we going to be talking about that again?
Potentially, and that's something that could come up. We can't do that without a vote of the people, which means we have to go to an election and go to the ballot box to ask for residents for their support for that. Obviously, going into this year, we don't have any elections on the books, and I doubt that we're going to be spending the millions of dollars it's going to take to call a special election. But with that comes other things as well, too, whether that's increasing the sales tax or others. There are a lot of short-term fixes that may seem easy for elected officials and politicians to go to the voters and ask them just to pay a little bit more. That way we can shore up our deficits. Given where we're at from a recession standpoint, people not opening their businesses and not going to be able to go to their jobs and struggling to make ends meet, I don't think now is the right time to be asking those questions of residents.
It always seems like costs are going up no matter which direction you look. I understand pension payments that are paid by the city, those are going up as well because of actuarial reworkings of how much needs to go into the system.
Exactly, and not to mention that we unfortunately didn't meet our investment return targets for this last year. We only returned about 0.5%. And when we don't meet that projected return targets, the city is on the hook to make up the difference. And so we're going to be seeing a large increase in our pension payments that's going to be due July 1. We won't know that final number till about February, but we do know that number is going to go up significantly, and we're going to have to pay for that. So that's part of the increase, where just our baseline deficit, without adding in all the other priorities that the new administration, Mayor Gloria, is going to have, or us as a council, is going to be the $124 million. So that's just the baseline. It's very likely that $124 million number is going to go up.
Gotcha. And that number significantly in terms of pension costs, can you put a number on that? What does that mean?
It's going to be upwards of at least $25 to $30 million increase, going into over $300 million. It's a large chunk of money that obviously could go to other services, but it's something that we're on the hook for to pay as a city.
All right. Well, you've taken on a big task here. San Diego Councilmember Chris Cate, chair of the city's Budget Committee for 2021, looking toward the expenses for 2022. We wish you the best in your efforts, and of course, we'll be covering them as you go along. And thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.